I want to welcome you all to Amaravati this Sunday afternoon. We've had quite a pleasant weekend with a group from Thailand that have been visiting, come to Europe specifically to offer alms to our monastery here at Amaravati. So that always is a very pleasant occasion in every way. When we're contemplating and reflecting on Dhamma, and to have a title for a talk like breathing spirit into the form, it gives a kind of beginning point to reflect from, because spirit and breath and form, all these are oftentimes words that we can take for granted because we know the meaning, and they're quite ordinary common words that we use. And therefore can not really be appreciated in any profound way. But in the development of profound and wisdom and understanding of life, the spirit and the form are very significant words. Also the breath, breathing is a focus in Buddhism. As we focus on the breath as an object that we concentrate our attention on. It's just the breathing of our own body, and this is sometimes seems quite baffling to many people, because breathing is such an ordinary thing and such an uninteresting function. It's not interesting like eating. Eating can be very interesting, but breathing is generally pretty boring for most people. And the spirit, and spirit is another word for the breath. And we talk about spiritual, and these words relate to that which animates and vivifies life. If we have just a form without any spirit, then it's a dead form. It's not animated. It has no soul. But as soon as you breathe into a form, or put your spirit into what you're doing, if you say you have a spirit, or you're a spirited person, means that there's an animation, a quality that we relate to something alive, something that gives meaning and purpose to the forms that we're in. And we can talk about a human being who's lost their spirit, and even though they're breathing, they're going through the motions of breathing and eating, being awake and sleeping, something they've lost that in them which gives their form, their life, a quality. They're merely going through the motions, just riding on a wave of life, but they're not putting anything into it. We can become dispirited or spiritless through depression, through loss of interest, through failure, through tragedy. When life sometimes treats us in a way that we're unprepared for, unwanted, then we can lose our spirit and become really like cowed forms, creatures, human creatures that just kind of drift through a lifespan, and it has no meaning, no purpose. We give it no beauty, no truth. No radiance comes from it. But the human spirit is one that we can relate to, or something we can call upon. We can will it to appear. The very fact that we have a will, we can choose, we can put attention on something, we can choose this over that. We can take an interest, we can absorb ourselves into a form of either a material form or an intellectual form. But when we do that, then something happens. The form springs to life. It has a radiant quality. The form is a container for the spirit. And when the spirit fills out the form, then you get what we would say a spiritual being. A human being with a spirit. And a spirit that is relating to something higher than just animal instinct or gross desires of the sensory realm. When we're talking about spiritual development, we're talking about how we relate to divinity or transcendence, such as in any religion. Any religion that is a proper religion is that which those conventions or forms which relate us and remind us of our relationship to a transcendent reality or ultimate reality or the absolute or divinity, or whatever words you may choose to express that relationship. One thing like being a Buddhist monk, one can ordain as a Buddhist monk, just go through, you mumble the formulas, and you go through the ceremony, and before this all happens, they shave off your hair, and you put on a robe, you mumble through the ceremonies, and you're called a Buddhist monk. But then you could spend the rest of your life just absolutely being a spiritless, institutionalized Buddhist monk. You're just going through the motions. You might obey all the rules and do all the things you're told to do, but there's nothing that you're putting into it. You're merely kind of going along with it, and there's nothing you're adding to it. And this is what we would refer to in modern terms as institutionalizing a human being, where you just get kind of conditioned to act and think and move like a Buddhist monk. But there's no spirit into the form. So sometimes religious forms can be criticized by people. Many people are very critical of religious forms because they see that that's oftentimes what happens to people in religions. They merely become conditioned and institutionalized and converted and into another form, but it's lacking. It's merely a form without a spirit. Even though the form might be a beautiful form, religious forms usually are quite beautiful in their appearance. But the individual being has not contributed anything to the form. It's merely a form without a spirit, and one just becomes something or other. And that's easy to do, to just go through life, riding along what's convenient and easy, expected of us, what's safe, because we have not discovered our spirit yet. We've not realized that we have a choice in this form as a human being to live life fully and to develop the spiritual qualities. And so a Buddhist monk can also be one who shaves his head, puts on a ochre robe, and takes the form of the Buddhist monk, the bhikkhu, and breathes the spirit into the form, really using the conventions, developing the conventions, contemplating, putting the breath of life into the conventional forms of a bhikkhu. Now this is possible also. This is what I hope most of us are doing here. Sometimes, say, with the nuns, people talk about why can't we revive the bhikkhuni order? In our form of Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, we lost the bhikkhuni order. The Buddha established a female counterpart to the bhikkhu called the bhikkhuni, and it somehow disappeared years ago. The form disappeared, and the spirit along with it. Then we've established what we call the 10 precept Siladhara here at Amaravati. But what's more important than trying to re-establish a form that no longer exists, or nobody quite knows what happened to it, is to use the form we have and put the spirit into it. If that works, then that is right. That is what will be of value, be of benefit to the individuals involved, as well as the people that are in touch, in contact with them. The same applies to, say, the Anagarikas, the 8 precepts, novices, men and women, can just go through the motions of it, riding along, and not breathe life into the form. Or they can. Well, that also applies to lay people, men and women, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, whatever religion. If we decide, if we realize we have this ability to breathe life, breathe a spirit back into these forms, then we are one who is moving toward a transcendent realization, a way out of just attachment to the form itself, because the form itself cannot be an end in itself. It's merely a means. And when the form becomes the end rather than the means, then it only is a dead form, because all forms are transient, impermanent, ephemeral, even less than unsatisfactory. Even the best forms in themselves cannot be an end. If they are, then it only takes us to death and decay and despair. So the secret to spiritual life is using the forms, but it's our breath, our life force that we're putting into the forms. We're not expecting the forms to breathe life into us. That's superstition, isn't it? Where I become a Buddhist monk thinking that it's going to transform me into something else. There's some magical ceremony, some kind of outer force, just by putting on the yellow robe and going through the ordination ceremony, that somehow forces from outside transform me into something else, into a Buddhist monk. That's a superstition. That's a believing that the actual ceremonies, precepts, and the form that one has chosen is going to bring you to life or transform you into something, or transmutation will take place. In the Buddhist teaching, he was very much aware of this, that the whole Buddhist emphasis is on a very deliberate, intentional will, using our will in a very deliberate, intentional way. And so what we intend is of most importance to us. In this life, say in the holy life, we have to make our intention very clear, very precise. For example, when a monk or a nun takes the precepts, takes the ordination, goes through the ordination ceremony, they are encouraged to make a fully rational intention for their life, to make a very deliberate choice to realize Nibbana, in Buddhist terms, a realization of Nibbana, or to get beyond all delusion, that I am taking these precepts, I am going through this ceremony, I am doing this thing in order to realize ultimate reality, to be free from all delusion. Now that we make very clear, that's the whole kind of emphasis and purpose of the actual ceremony. It's like a public announcement. Now, individually, we might feel totally incapable of doing this. As personalities, we can feel, oh, who am I to ever think that I could ever be an enlightened being? Because most of us aren't terribly feel that we are particularly special or terribly gifted and outstanding, say, that I could possibly think that I might get enlightened as a personality. That thought is rather frightening in a way. Because personally, in the Western mind, we tend to modern Western human beings tend to dwell very much on in a critical way towards themselves, if you see what I mean. We spend a lot of time remembering our faults and dwelling on our weaknesses and our deficiencies. We make such a point, we exaggerate our faults and our deficiencies so much that we can become completely dispirited in this life, just feel totally incapable of doing anything other than just surviving, maybe. In a benevolent society such as this one, you can kind of ride along in it and get by easy enough till you get old and die, because it's a benevolent society that doesn't demand very much of its members. So in Britain we can just kind of ride along with the least amount of effort, because we think that's all we're capable of doing. If we are emphasizing, exaggerating, becoming obsessed with the faults and weaknesses that we see in ourselves as personalities, as individual beings. So in the holy life, when a man or woman decide to take on the form of the Buddhist monk or the Buddhist nun, then we want to make that intention the most perfect intention that a human being could possibly ever think of or possibly make in their lives. And it's got to be very rational, not just from an inspired state of mind in the moment, not after a very successful meditation retreat where you feel very inspired, but from a quite ordinary place in your mind where it's just ordinary daily life and you're not particularly inspired, but you're just maybe in your ordinary way, maybe even thinking of yourself in very negative terms, but you're using your ability to intend toward the ultimate perfection that's possible for a human being. And then you go through the ceremony, say an ordination ceremony like we've had here at Amaravati for the nuns, and at Chitters on the 1st of last July for the monks, where the community itself, the monastic communities, actually make this possible, and this announcement is made, and many people come, many people participate, so that the whole ceremony helps to make this intention very strong in our minds. It's not just a momentary good idea that we don't tell anyone, and then it tends to fade very quickly if we don't really make a strong determination. So that's what gives those ordination ceremonies their power, because they're quite powerful experiences, even for old hands like myself. You still feel its tremendous power and presence at an ordination ceremony. And even the lay people tell me they feel it, and they sometimes don't even know what's happening. They're just standing on the sidelines. But they're also very much, you as lay people are also very much a part of that ceremony, because you're witnessing it. Witnessing a man or a woman that's going forth into the homeless life, away from all the security of the institutions that we depend on as personalities, taking the risk of going out into the unknown with that intention of enlightenment, of perfection, within the limitations of our human condition. And I find this something that needs to be really reconsidered now, at a time where our world has become very profane. Our society now is a very kind of profane, degenerate society. Isn't it? Modern Western materialism it tends towards degeneracy and licentiousness. It's not a beautiful society anymore. Our society doesn't invite us to go up, doesn't inspire us, doesn't encourage us upwards towards the good, but it tends to just put up with us at some of our worst moments, just going along with our greed and our complaining minds. So modern governments, modern institutions tend to ride along on a level of mediocrity of the human state, rather than pointing towards perfection and ultimate potential of our human condition. And this is what religion's function is really for. We can't expect our society to do this for us. It's not the function of a society per se to do that. It's the function of religion to do that. That's what religions are for, what the religious conventions are aimed at. At that realization, ultimate realization of our proper relationship to the divine, or the transcendent, or the absolute, or the ultimate truth, God, or Dhamma, or whatever symbols you prefer. That's what it means. That which is beyond birth and death, beyond just the limitation of form, and beyond the limitation of just the conditioned cause and conditionality. In modern Western Europe, there's a tendency to be quite cynical and negative. It's easy to really put this kind of thinking down as just being kind of altruistic or optimistic or unrealistic. We emphasize what's wrong with ourselves and what's wrong with our society, what's wrong with the neighbors, what's wrong with the people that rule the country, what's wrong with the other countries. We're so good at criticizing, and we tend to expect mediocrity anyway as a kind of way of just getting by, and we don't. When any one person kind of makes some effort to go beyond that, oftentimes they're criticized or made fun of, because our society doesn't expect us to rise up anymore. And it tends towards being cynical towards those who still might have that inclination. So it's easy to just think, oh, it's all just hocus pocus, it's all just foolishness. Look at the history of the religions. Look at the history of Christianity, and you can have a whole list of terrible things that you can say the Christians are responsible for. You can do that to the Muslims, and you can do that to the Buddhists. You can say, look what's happening in Sri Lanka and Tibet and all these different places where, in those are Buddhist countries. Cambodia was really Buddhist. How could such a terrible thing have happened? And we can just look at the failure and the faults of our religion. We can emphasize the corrupt members. We can see corruption in the Sangha or in the priesthood or whatever. It's very common, like in Thailand, to scandals about monks, and to make that kind of big news and gossip, to emphasize the monk that's gone off, that's gone wrong. And then we can say, see, that's Buddhism for you. That's it. And put it all down because one monk happens to do something wrong, and you can reject the whole lot because of that. But that's not right, is it? Because the form is still all right. It's like with, say, in the Theravada school of Buddhism, the form is very good form. It still works. It's still a realizable, practical form. Whether any monk in the Theravada school of Buddhism breathes life and spirit into the form is something else. It's not because anything's wrong with the form. It's maybe because the people that are using the form don't really know how to use it anymore, or just misusing it. It's easy to misuse forms. I mean, one can take a Buddha rupa and kill somebody with it. Hit somebody over the head with a brass Buddha image. It's not the fault of the Buddha image, is it? It's a misuse of an image. It wasn't made for that. The Buddha image wasn't made as an instrument for murder, but it still can be used for that. So we reflect in this way, then we see that, say, the Buddhist monk, even though we might see faults and dwell on the failures and the corruption of various monks, it still doesn't make the slightest bit of difference in regards to, it doesn't hurt the form at all. The form is still good. And we still, as individual beings, have the right and the opportunity to breathe our spirit, our life, into the form, so that form is then being used in the right way. The Buddhist monk, the Buddhist nun is then a form being used for what it was intended for. It has the right intention. Now this applies to even everything in our life, even the, say, ordinary worldly conditions of our life. In modern society, the conventions, social conventions, are now even profaned. Like marriage, for example, tends to be something that is lightly regarded or not regarded as necessary, just a kind of legal kind of legal contract that you sign in order to get legal rights if you want to get divorced. Or it can be a form that is just not just to at its worst to be a legal contract. But then when you contemplate, say, the ideal of marriage, what the intention of it is, then one sees that it is, say, at its very best, a form in which a man and a woman join their lives together in order to, say, where they put each other first, where we have to grow up when we get married, don't we? We have to put somebody else in our lives, in our minds. When you're living alone, on your own terms, you can me first and you're second. I want to go where I want to go and do what I want to do. If I get married, that means I have to think of somebody else. So some of us don't get married. When we do decide to get married, then sometimes we still think of ourselves first. Or say, ideally, it's the opportunity to put somebody else first, isn't it? We put the other person, the spouse, first, and me second. Say the ideal of marriage. And then when the children come, then the children are first, and the husband and wife second. So in some ways it's always a relinquishment of selfish interest, because our minds, the human mind, is a mind that we can incorporate, we can include everything within it. We can just live for our own self, for my own desires, to fulfill all my own desires, just become one-pointed of living life only for myself. Or, say, in maturing as an individual being, you tend to open your mind to include others. And that means you have to let go of yourself as being the most important. And that's very good for us, to be able to do that, to put somebody else, to think of somebody else first. It brings us joy. It's a joyful experience to love somebody and to put them first. And I think we all find great joy when that happens, when we can actually put somebody else first in our lives and ourselves relate to that person, that somebody else, through love, through respect, through joyfulness. So then the family, the marriage relationship, the family are placed in a position that is very respectful and beautiful, rather than just legal rights that you're going to, if we happen to not like each other after a few years, well, I want to make sure that I get the house, I have custody of the kids, and all the rest, to make sure that we have, we're not going to be left behind in case the person we marry suddenly puts themselves first and us last. Maybe they put somebody else first besides me. This is probably the human mind. We can be very fickle and very disloyal to ourselves and to others, to everything. We just follow impulse and immediate kind of impulses and preferences of a moment, or momentary passionate feeling. In using monasticism then as a form for one's life, you're putting, the idea is you're, as a monk or as a nun, as a monastic, you're using Sangha as your family. So Sangha is first, rather than yourself. So like in a monastic community here, say at Amaravati, then the reflection for our lives is the community's first and we're second. As individual persons, we don't put ourselves first. And this applies to, say, from the most senior member to the most junior member. myself saying, being the most senior member of this community, the community's first before myself. The welfare of the community is more important than my own welfare as an individual. And then the newest member, the newest anagarika that joins the community, also, and they might not particularly feel that way much of the time, but that's the ideal that we put into the mind as a reflection, that even the most junior member of the community, what might be considered the most insignificant member of the community, as far as being most junior, is still putting the community first and themselves second. So in that way, you're getting a community, a real sense of Sangha, of what we call Kalyana Mitta, or noble friends, because with each one of us is putting the community first and ourselves second to the welfare of the community. And we can do that. In our minds we can actually do that. We can include one other person, or we can include a community. We can actually bring that to all sentient beings. Like in the practice of metta bhavana, in the Buddhist practice of metta bhavana, you're including all sentient beings in your mind. You're bringing into your consciousness as a perception the possibility of all living sentient creatures and their welfare. And you as your relationship to that totality of being. So this is, now, then to contemplate this further, we see that for each one of us, we have to be the subject of this experience of life, don't we? Each one of you are the subject of your lives. You have to experience life from your form, from the way you are, the way your body is and where it is, and its state, whether it's healthy or not, whether it's young or old, male or female, whatever state it is. It's where you have to acknowledge that you have to abide within it for what it is. It's our karma, in other words. Like this body is, one can be critical of it and think, with vanity, how much one would have liked to have maybe had nicer something or other, better looking, or we can always, with our critical minds, we can berate and despise these particular forms we're in. But then that only leads to depression and misery. That doesn't lead to transcendence and liberation. Because the form, it doesn't matter whether it's male or female, or attractive or unattractive, or young or old, or black or white, or what. This is not important towards, say, that intention, ultimate intention of realizing ultimate reality. All we need to do is accept the form for what it is. Even if it's a sickly, crippled, hunchback form, or leprosy, or cancer, these are not obstacles to spiritual development. Blindness, or whatever, these are not obstacles to spiritual development. Even if one is born into a human form that is, in every way not very nice, if you still have the ability to reflect and contemplate, if that still operates normally, then you have that potential for perfect enlightenment, for perfect understanding. And so then we learn, we use the position we're in, the way it is from this subjective position, and to reflect from what happens to it, the way life happens to impinge on it. And we're contemplating that what happens to it is always just impermanent, whatever contacts this form, through the eyes, through the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, the way the mind's been conditioned, the way your intellect or your ability to perceive is conditioned by your family, your cultural background, education and so forth. All of that is then witnessed no longer from the critical mind that's judging it in terms of being good or bad, but merely using your intuitive capacities for seeing the impermanence, the way it is, that whatever it is, on the sensory plane, this experience of sensitivity is an experience of transiency, of change, of flux, of flow. And then and that implies that what flows can be infinitely variable. The qualities can be various. We can have pleasure, pain, beauty, ugliness, happiness, suffering, good health, bad health. The very best to the very worst is in the actual flow and experience of life. It's just the way it is. And that which can actually witness and observe mindfully, reflect and understand it for what it is a transcendent understanding, or what we call Buddha. That is what is the true Buddha, that ability to see and know things as they are, in whatever the qualities might be. Qualities can be anything, aren't they? Sane, insane. You can have thoughts that are totally mad, trivial, foolish, stupid, dull. You can have very rational, sensible, intelligent, bright thoughts. But when there is the Buddha operating at full capacity, then that Buddha knows that whatever is subject to arising is subject to ceasing. The Buddha is merely reflecting on the way it is, not reacting to the quality that it's presenting to us. So this is why why the refuge in Buddha is such an important realization in our lives, because that gives us this impetus to really look at and watch and observe how things are, rather than merely to try to react and control and manipulate the conditioned world out of fear and out of desire. Fear and desire, we tend to be easily identified with those two forces. They're very strong, they're very powerful emotions, tendencies in this form as a human being. So they can be very overwhelming. And this is where it's so important to actually see, reflect on, observe that desire, whatever it is, whatever quality or type or whatever it might appear to be, is that at least it's impermanent. If you really examine and investigate desire, you see that it is. It's something that's in flux. It has no permanent quality. Fear is the same. Fear, when we really look at it objectively, is just that. It's just a condition of the mind. And when there's that kind of understanding, then fear loses its power. Desire loses its ability to delude us. They're merely what they are in the moment. They're that way, they arise and they cease. And there's a feeling of understanding, of knowing the true nature of things. Now sometimes we can be very cynical because we see that so many human beings living on this planet at this time, not very many seem to be enlightened at all, and we tend to hear about, especially about the worst ones, seem to get in the news. The worse they are, the more news they tend to make. They can be quite interesting, sinners and gangsters and killers and madmen and adulterers and sex maniacs, and all these are somehow very interesting to us. When you look at gossip columns or little tidbits in newspapers and popular magazines, they're all about people doing pretty sleazy kind of things. And why is it that we find that so interesting? Why is it that if you wanted to make lots of money selling a magazine or a journal, you have to probably aim it on that level? The more kind of refined and sacred your journalism or your writings might be, the less popular they become. Why is that? Maybe it's because human beings are just that way. They just we have no potential for ultimate reality. Maybe we are. Maybe we're just being terribly optimistic and very idealistic about everything. Maybe the ultimate reality is that we're really just sleazy mediocrities. Because that is a really cynical statement, isn't it? But there's something in us that knows that that is not true. At least in myself, I know that there's certainly something that easily goes towards sleaziness and mediocrity. I mean, it's certainly not something that I can't understand, because I certainly feel a pull in that direction a lot of the time. But there's also something that knows something beyond that, and that really wants to exert that, put that kind of spirit into the life, where you rise up above that kind of downward pull, that force of just pulling you down into just drifting along without any effort, just getting by, kind of just watching television all day, going through the motions of life till you die. There's something that say within myself that that realizes the potential for transcendence, that aspires, that has aspiration, and is willing to sacrifice all those other strong pulls, willing to try to keep working on oneself to transcend or rise up beyond just what is impulsive or immediately tempting, or what's the easiest thing to do with one's life without putting any effort into it. Sometimes one feels lazy. I mean, I tend towards laziness. Laziness has been one of my problems. Sometimes one just doesn't want to be bothered putting forth effort into anything, and just kind of get along, float along. But then, if one does that, if that's what one tends to do, there's something in one that really is very strongly saying, stop this, rise up, get beyond this. You can be better than this. And that I trust. that seems right, that seems beautiful, that seems worth following. Because when you do it, then you begin to trust in that which is truly good and truly beautiful, worthwhile. You begin to realize that more within your own experience of life. It's a realization of it. It's not just a nice idea in the brain. It's not just being altruistic. But the more you rise up and breathe, put that spirit into the form that you're in, and really live your lives to that perfect potential, then you have that realization. And in that realization is liberation, freedom, joy, true happiness is our natural state, in other words. The sleazy mediocrity is not where we really belong, even though that's the easiest for us to kind of sink into. That's not where we are really at home. That's not where we can really feel contented or feel respect for ourselves or respect for anything. That sinking into just sleazy mediocrity only leaves us with a sense of despair and depression in our minds, in our hearts, because there's something as though we've wasted the opportunity. We've wasted a life. We've settled for something that's not very worthwhile, that we can't respect, that we're not really content even in just riding along in what's easy to do. What is wonderful is how that so many that as you trust in that direction, in that intention for perfect enlightenment, for perfect understanding and freedom from delusion, even though on a personal level you might feel quite unworthy and incapable, that whole personal reference falls away. That way of thinking about yourself, that personality view becomes increasingly more illusory and less real. That in you which is always criticizing yourself or emphasizing or exaggerating your flaws and weaknesses, that which disparages and nags in you, that eventually, when seen and understood for what it is, it loses its power and its grip in our lives. It falls away, fades away from us. And more there's just the purity, a pure intelligence, the purity of the heart, the mind and the heart that is receptive, sensitive, open, all-embracing, free and liberated, rather than this conditioned personality with all its neurotic problems. So we talk about the spiritual life, the breath. We have will. We have aspiration. All these things imply our potential as spiritual beings. If this was not possible, we wouldn't be able to even conceive of it. If it was just being idealistic and it's just a fantasy world and not being realistic at all, I doubt seriously we would even be able to conceive of it. Like the animal kingdom can't conceive, can it, of transcendence. Not to put down the animal kingdom, but I've noticed that they don't seem to. And in my experience of them, to have that aspiration in their lives. But they're intelligent. They're conscious beings like ourselves. They have intelligence and they're conscious, but they don't aspire to anything. They are what they are. They are. A cat is just what it is. It's an honest creature. Our problem is that we aren't really what we are at all until we are enlightened, because we can't be just creatures and because we have this aspiration, we have an intuitive mind. We're in touch with something transcendent, ultimately real and perfect, so that we can't just be content as creatures, animals, or even refined creatures. We can't find real contentment even with being the most sensitive and refined creature. That's still unsatisfactory for us. And why is that? Because that's not our true nature. That in this form, this human form, we can only find true contentment through enlightenment, through ultimate realization, through seeing things clearly, honestly, perfectly. And this is our potential, this is our possibility in this human form. And this needs to be emphasized again and again. We need to remind ourselves of this because we forget. We too easily give in, too easily see ourselves from the critical mind, too easily are intimidated and caught up in the profane views of our society, thinking about ourselves in very gross ways and believing that that's being realistic. And it's so easy to be stuck in those kind of attitudes. So in an opportunity like this afternoon, to present this particular reflection for you, to remind you, to try to encourage you, or to, if you have this kind of aspiration and intuition, sometimes you don't realize what a great gift it is. Sometimes you think maybe you're a bit off, or you're something a bit strange about it, because you think the profane human being, the sleazy mediocrity is normal behavior. And because that is not satisfying to you, maybe you think you're abnormal. So in a time and place, opportunities that we have now, we tend to be drawn to places like this, or to things that are possible for us, where we can remember, where we can find other people, friends, that have that same intuition, that same aspiration, because it helps us to remember what our true nature is, and how important it is to trust in that, and to continually try to get above, to rise up to life, to do the good, to put that energy into your life, to live it with that tremendous spirit and aspiration, that perfect intention. And this human state is to this rising up is a most important reflection. Because if we don't rise up, what happens then is we sink down. We tend to, we don't stand still. Either you rise up or you sink down. and so there's no static point in this position of our humanity. You can kind of float along in a kind of kind of tasteless porridge of mediocrity for a while, but eventually it goes into depression and despair, into real unpleasant mental states. So that the aspiring human mind with its intuitive abilities, intuition is a unitive function of mind, isn't it? It's through our intuition that we realize unity and oneness. It's not through our conditioned discriminative capacities, is it? Your education, your intellectual mind is very much conditioned to make you feel very separate and isolated and identified with the discriminative things, being a personality, being a man, being a woman, being English, being American, being young or old, being rich or poor, being worthwhile or worthless. All the discriminative identities, perceptions we have of ourselves, that's one function of our mind. But in a spiritual aspiration, we're opening toward an intuitive, mindful, reflective capacities of our human state, in which we transcend these discriminations. And we no longer identify with the separative functions of our mind or our bodies. We're free from that delusion.